Welcome to Thrive with Pride from Age Options, an online space for LGBT plus older adults and those who care for them. This is a recording of a live event held on Zoom, which included a discussion after the presentation, which was not recorded. This month, we welcome Maureen Burns, a community health worker, promotora de salud, and research liaison with the HAP Foundation. Maureen works in Rogers Park and surrounding communities, providing free and culturally affirming health education and linking patients and loved ones to resources within their community. She has over 15 years of experience working in healthcare and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Community Health, Culture, and Aging. Maureen is currently a student at Northeastern Illinois University pursuing her Master's of Public Health degree. Maureen is a certified CRM teacher and was trained by the Trauma Resource Institute in the Community Resiliency model. Maureen shared the Community Resiliency model, or CRM approach to stress and trauma, including a set of tools for everyday use. Please see the video description below for slides and other resources, and join us again in July for part 2 of this important discussion. After you watch this video, please fill out the survey in the video description below. Okay, well, thank you, Maureen, for joining, and I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to you all about CRM, the Community Resiliency Model. So my name is Maureen Burns. My pronouns are she, her, or ella in Spanish. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides and start the presentation. I do appreciate skipping the introductions just because we have a lot of content to get through that I hope to get through, but I am excited to meet you all. So if anyone wants to introduce themselves in the chat, please feel free to do that. So today we're going to be talking about how to manage stress and trauma through the Community Resiliency Model, also known as CRM. And as Jason mentioned, my name is Maureen Burns. I'm a community health worker, or CHW, with the HAP Foundation. So I did just want to explain a little bit. So the organization that I work for, the HAP Foundation, we are a nonprofit and we are focused on serious illness. So much of the other presentations that I give are focused on explaining hospice and palliative care, explaining caregiver, navigating caregiving, coping with grief and loss, and advanced directives. So that's really usually my focus is serious illness health education. But we also have recognized that toxic stress and trauma impacts everyone. And it's even more sort of top of mind when you're dealing with a serious illness diagnosis, or you're caregiving, or you're grieving, to have that sort of additional stress on you. And so because of that, we're really lucky to partner with Trauma Resource Institute, which is the institute that put out this model. And so I was trained by them to become a certified CRM teacher. And so much of the content you're going to see is content that I learned from them and that I'm now sharing with you, because this is the community resiliency model. So it's not meant just to be individuals, but to spread throughout communities. So as I mentioned, I'm certified CRM teacher, and the CRM skills are important for everyone, but especially for people who might be facing additional stressors due to serious illness. We also see that when people have unregulated nervous systems or high levels of stress, that can actually lead to serious and chronic illness because it damages the tissues of the body. So after that little overview, I'm just going to jump right in and say that the Community Resiliency Model, or CRM, is a set of 6 wellness skills, very simple skills. Some you might already be using but not have a name for, and others might be brand new. But these skills can be used across the lifespan. So a 3-year-old can use some of these skills, and a 101-year-old can use some of these skills, and everyone in between. Also, the model is very adaptable across cultures, religions, and ability levels. And the idea is to use these skills with what we call the activities of daily living. So to use these skills to cope with stress and trauma, to be able to be your best self and live your best life. This is important because we all have a nervous system. And when we learn to regulate our nervous system through CRIM, it can really be life-changing. We can take some power back and we learn how to bring our nervous system into balance. And then what's really cool is we can also share the skills with our family members, our friends, and our communities. And in that way, CRIM skills can become a common healing language. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. But before I do, I also just want to mention that you may have heard of trauma-informed care. So trauma-informed care differs from conventional models in that it understands that people have undergone trauma. They have had bad things happen to them, and this impacts their behavior. The CRIM model is trauma-informed, but it's also resiliency-informed. So it doesn't only focus on what has happened to people, but it also focuses on people's resiliency. So what is right about you, and what are your strengths? What is also true in addition to what you may have been through in terms of trauma or stress. So there are 6 total CRIM skills, and because today I only have about 30, 40 minutes to talk to you all, we're not going to get to all 6. But I do hope to get to 3, and then I will be sharing with you all some resources, including an app that you can go to if you found the skills helpful and you want to learn more. I would also love to come back sometime in the future and go over the final 3 skills. But we're going to begin with the first skill, which is tracking. And this is the most foundational skill because in order to use the other skills, you really have to start learning how to track. So today we're going to talk about tracking, resourcing, and help now. But before we talk about tracking, I want to start by talking about the resiliency zone or the OK zone. So this is a big, important piece of the model. The resiliency zone is a state of well-being in mind, body, and spirit. So when you are in your zone, it does not mean that everything is perfect. It does not mean that you don't experience stressors or even reminders of past trauma. But what it means is that you are able to cope with those stressors and still show up as your best self. And when you use the skills of CRIM, you can use those skills to return to your OK zone, and you can also use the skills to widen your OK zone over time. So you see that it kind of looks like a wave. There's some ups and downs like we all experience, but the key here is we're able to manage and cope. So I'll give an example that like if I oversleep and I forget to drink my coffee and my day is off to a bad start, that might mean that something very small could set me off. Maybe I get stuck in traffic and that bumps me out of my zone. And I start, being kind of aggressive with people. Maybe my friend calls me and I snap at them on the phone. It's not because of anything they did. It's because I've been bumped out of my OK zone and I'm no longer coping appropriately. So I also just want to mention that there's no shame in being bumped out of your zone, right? It happens to all of us. This is part of life. Sometimes it's a stressful event. Sometimes it's a trauma, or maybe even a reminder of a past trauma that can bump us out of our zone. And so there's different ways that this can happen, but one way is what we call stuck in a high zone. This is when, kind of like I described before, you might be edgy, irritable, aggressive, or anxious. And so it might kind of manifest in an angry way. There are also sensations attached to these feelings. A big part of CRIM is recognizing our internal sensations. So sensations that go along with being stuck in a high zone might be elevated heart rate or an increase in temperature or muscle tension are some of the things that you might notice if you're stuck in a high zone. Similarly, you can also get bumped out of your zone and get bumped low. So this might manifest as feelings of depression, sadness, being tired, lack of motivation, just as a few examples. So the goal with CRIM is really recognizing that we all have this zone, right? And when we're in the zone, things are good, right? We're able to be our best selves and we're able to manage stress. Some people might naturally have a wider zone than others, so they might have greater capacity to cope even when faced with stressors. But we can also learn to expand our zone, which is really pretty cool, that we have that power. And the neuroscience actually backs that up, that the more awareness is brought to our sensations, we are able to create new neural pathways and increase our states of well-being. So as we learn some of these skills, keep in mind that there are things you can utilize if you notice yourself getting bumped out of your zone. There are skills you can utilize to come back down into your okay zone. And also, the more you use the skills over time, you can widen your zone so that it takes more to actually bump you out. But I also want to talk a little bit about life experiences. So all the things that we go through, both big and small traumas, that impact us and that can bump us out of our zone. So we really do go through a lot, right? We have systemic things such as racism, poverty. Those things can also manifest on an interpersonal level. So you might have like, okay, you're dealing with racism in systems, but then you might also have interpersonal racism where someone discriminates against you, or interpersonal homophobia or transphobia. And that's a stressful experience. That's traumatic for some people. Also, any type of abuse, things like sexual assault. These are all traumatic things that we go through and that impact our mental well-being, but also our physical health. So I just want to be clear when looking at the slide and all the things that we go through, I am not saying that trauma is okay. I'm not seeking to normalize any of these things, right? Homophobia is not okay. War is not okay. Sexual assault is not okay. And we should be doing everything we can at a macro systemic level to rid the world of those things. But at the same time, we know that those things exist. And sadly, some of these things have existed for thousands of years, right? So we also want to give people tools that they can use right now to help them cope with those things, because we know that they exist and we know that they harm people. So CRIM is an example of that. It's a tool that people can use to cope. And another thing that's unique about CRIM, you don't need a therapist or a mental health practitioner to use these skills. The model is not against clinicians in any way, but it recognizes that not all of us have access to mental health professionals, or we might have had bad experiences in the past with those professionals, or it just might not be our choice to utilize them. So the model is unique in that you can utilize the skills on your own without professional help. So I do want to talk a little bit more about kind of the science, the biology. So in CRIM, we are trying to help people understand that many of the common reactions we experience to highly stressful or traumatic experiences are a result of our humanity, of how we are designed and our biology. So there's a real focus on the biology of the human nervous system and understanding that there are common human reactions to stress and trauma that are driven by our biology. And so because of this, CRIM has a real focus on sensations. So like I talked about before, breathing, heart rate, body temperature, how your muscles feel, your digestion, all of these are examples of sensations. But of course, sensations are also accompanied by thoughts and feelings. But we really try and focus on the biology so that people view this as the design of our bodies and not some sort of mental weakness or some sort of failing. This is actually driven by our biology. And so learning about that can also help us learn ways to calm our nervous system so that we can return to our resilient zone. So there's a few big words on this slide, and I'm not trying to give like a whole science lesson, but I do want to let you know about the autonomic nervous system. So this system has two parts, and you might think of it as an accelerator and a brake in your car. So during times of stress, our SNS, which is sympathetic nervous system, the SNS arouses and prepares the body for action. So this is part of our evolutionary design, that we need to be alert to potential dangers. So when our body senses a danger, the SNS goes to work, and it starts to release stress hormones, and those hormones ready the body to take action. You might also notice when SNS is activated, elevated breathing, elevated heart rate, blood pressure going up, and sweating. But this is meant to be temporary. That SNS is like a gas pedal, but once the danger clears, or once we've dealt with whatever is going on in our environment, our parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to kick in. And that nervous system acts like a brake. So it brings the body back into a state of rest, our breathing returns to normal, our heart rate goes down, and we have increases in saliva and digestion. So this slide is just really meant to illustrate how our bodies are designed to work, right? It's a relationship between the gas pedal and the brake pedal, and neither one of them is supposed to run the show, right? They're supposed to work in tandem, and when they are working in tandem, we are in rhythm, our bodies are working properly, and we are at our best in handling all of life's challenges. However, many things can happen that can cause our SNS to go into overdrive. So this is when, maybe because of toxic stress or because of a traumatic experience, we are always on high alert. So that gas pedal is continually being pressed with no brake. And so when this happens, when people are always in that kind of fight or flight or survival response, those stress hormones continue to be released. And this actually can damage our bodies. It can destroy tissues in our bodies, blood vessels and arteries can be damaged, and it can increase our rates of chronic diseases, high blood pressure, heart attack, and stroke. And in addition to that, it doesn't feel great mentally, right? We're not able to show up as our best balanced selves if we are constantly in a state of alertness or danger. So this can actually, impact both our mental and our physical health. And so that's why we don't want our SNS to always be in overdrive. We want to find a balance and healthy ways to cope with unpleasant sensations and with stress. And I like to always bring this back to kind of the overriding laws of nature, right? There's natural rhythms that exist in the earth. There's seasons, cycles of the moon, ebb and flow of the ocean's waters. There are stormy days and there are sunny days. So just as there is kind of this balance within nature, our bodies are also designed to be in balance. So when the SNS and PNS are working in tandem, this is like a beautiful human design. That's like the beauty of who we are. And so when we embrace that concept of balance, we can learn to use these skills to return to balance. So to kind of think of CRM skills as shelter from a storm, right? When something is happening in your environment, you can use these skills to bring yourself back into balance. The other example that I'll give is if I have a garden. I don't know if we've got any gardeners in the audience, but if I have a garden and I notice some weeds, and I only pay attention to the weeds, if I'm always tending to the weeds and they're the only ones who get sunlight or water, the weeds are going to grow and spread. But if I spend my time nurturing the flowers, they will soon outnumber the weeds. And even if a weed or two remains, paying attention to the abundance of those flowers and their beauty will help override the weeds bothering me or the weeds being a problem. The same is true within ourselves. If we can lean into pleasant sensations and sensations of well-being, we can actually grow them. And as I said, this is backed up by research into the brain. So scientists have found that our brain has the lifelong, not just in childhood, but lifelong capacity to change and rewire itself in response to learning and life experiences. And we actually have the ability to create new neurons and connections between neurons throughout our lifetime. So the reason why this slide refers to this as hope is, many times when we've experienced trauma, whether as children or as adults, it can feel like that's our destiny, right? We had no control over what happens to us, but it happened, and it can kind of feel like we are trapped by that trauma. But this science shows us that healing is possible, and that human beings have an amazing capacity for resiliency. So learning and new experiences and practicing these skills can actually help us change our brains, which is pretty amazing. I also want to give another example here when we talk about neuroplasticity and forming these new connections in our brain. Think about if I live in a jungle and my friend lives on the other side of the jungle, right? The first time I go on a walk to see my friend, I'm going to have to put in some serious work, right? I'm going to have to be clearing brush, maybe cutting down trees, kind of forging a path in the middle of the jungle. It's going to be hard work. But then guess what? The next time that I go to visit that friend, that path is already laid. And the more times I walk it, the stronger it gets. The same is true for neural pathways. The more times you use it, the stronger and more permanent it becomes. So having said that, I want to jump into our first skill, which is tracking. And tracking just means paying attention or noticing sensations. So noticing what is happening inside your body in the present moment. So you can see on the slide some sensation words, things like pain, vibration, heart rate, breathing, muscle tension or looseness, weight of muscles, temperature. All of these are sensation words. And I want to acknowledge that it can take some time to learn sensation words. It was difficult for me because I'm a very analytical person. I tend to focus on thoughts and feelings. But tracking is really paying attention to your sensations. We also have a negativity bias when it comes to sensations, right? If we are going through something and we are stressed, it's easier to notice those unpleasant sensations. So with tracking, we really encourage you to pay attention to internal sensations, not only when things are going wrong and maybe you feel your heart rate elevate, but when things are going right, to pay attention to what sensations, what your temperature is like, what your muscles and breathing are like when you're having a good day and when things are going well. The reason why tracking is so important is we need to pay attention to these internal sensations and then determine whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral for us. Keep in mind that the same sensation might be pleasant to one person and unpleasant to another. But we need to recognize if the sensations are pleasant or unpleasant, because it's those unpleasant sensations that are going to bump us out of our zone or are going to be our clue that we have been bumped out of our resiliency zone. And it's the pleasant sensations that we're going to want to lean into as we try and get back into our okay zone. So keep in mind, it can take time to track sensations. And if you have trouble identifying sensations, it's also okay to track feelings and thoughts, because each sensation is connected to accompanying feelings and thoughts. So the idea behind tracking is that if we track and we notice unpleasant sensations, we can then use other CRM skills to help us move towards more pleasant sensations. Basically, we are learning to discern the differences between sensations of distress and sensations of well-being. That sounds pretty simple and basic, but it's something that a lot of us are not in the practice of doing. Once we identify sensations as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, then we begin to have a choice to pay attention, a choice into what we pay attention to. So really leaning into pleasant sensations, or at least neutral ones, helps us to grow those sensations within us. We can really choose to nurture those pleasant sensations and nurture resiliency. Now I'm going to talk about skill 2, which is resourcing. And I think a lot of people might have experience with this skill already, but they might not call it resourcing. A resource is any person, place, thing, memory, or part of yourself, really anything that makes you feel calm, pleasant, peaceful, strong, or resilient. So it's something that brings you joy. It can be a real thing, or it can be imaginary. It can be internal or external. And one of the best ways to practice the first skill, tracking, is to develop resources and then track your sensations when you're around those resources or utilizing those resources. So examples of resources could be talking to a friend, petting your dog or cat, listening to music, writing a poem. I have a friend who her favorite thing to do when she's feeling stressed is to imagine that she doesn't have a job and that she's always on a cruise. And that, of course, is imaginary, but she accesses that imaginary resource. She imagines herself on that boat, ocean breeze blowing, the wind in her hair, and that brings her joy, even though it's not reality. So that's just an example of an imagined resource. But really encourage you all to start identifying some resources in your life, big or strong, big or small. A big one for me is music. I love listening to music. And when I'm stressed, I notice that music calms me. Another one could be laughter, laughing with friends, watching a favorite TV show, looking at photographs that remind you of happy times in the past. These are all resources, and you can access a resource when you're experiencing an unpleasant sensation. You can access a resource to help you get to a more pleasant sensation and return to your resiliency zone. I also just want to mention that, it can take up to 14 seconds of our attention to really get the full impact in our brains of a resource. And it's also helpful that we ask questions that can intensify the pleasant sensations that are associated with a resource. So for an example, if I'm talking to my friend and she is stressed out and I say, you should access a resource, think about something that brings you joy. And she tells me, okay, I'm thinking about those times when I was a kid, when I was with my grandmother. That's my resource. I could then ask questions that could expand the sensations connected to the resource. So I could say, what was your grandmother's name? What did you guys do together? And she tells me they used to cook in the kitchen. I could ask, what did you used to make? What did it taste like? What were the smells like? And by asking these questions, whether we're asking them to someone else or we're kind of asking ourselves internally, it strengthens the felt sense of the resource and it helps to really grow pleasant sensations. So just to be clear, this is something that some people might do naturally. You're having a bad day, you feel stressed out, you think about something that makes you happy, right? That makes sense. But having the vocabulary of calling it a resource and intensifying that resource can really help you when you've been bumped out of your zone. You can access that resource so that you can return to your okay zone and be your best resilient self. The third skill that I'm going to talk about, third and final for today, is what we call help now or reset now. So you can think of this as an emergency stop button. And the reason why I say that is sometimes we are so activated. Activated is like another word for triggered. We are so activated in our nervous system. Something happens. We are so bumped out of our zone. We are kind of in a crisis mode. We might not even have time or the wherewithal to even consciously track our sensations or to access a resource, right? That might be too much. Help now is a very quick way to divert our attention. It distracts us when we are stuck in a high or low zone. We use these strategies to bring our attention to something else, really anything else besides the distress and the feeling of being overwhelmed. So these strategies are very simple, but they have been shown to activate other parts of our body and our brain. And in that way, they help us return to balance. So these are some of the help now or reset now skills. Very simple things like saying quickly, count back from 10 or count back from 20. Go for a walk. Touching a surface is one of my favorite ones. I'm very sort of touch oriented. And so sometimes I will just touch whatever is near me and really focus on how that surface or that substance feels. Because then I'm bringing my attention away from the unpleasant things that are going on for me and towards this surface. Also drinking a glass of water. For me, I've noticed that I drink water throughout the day. But if I'm really feeling stressed out and I need to use water as a help now, it helps if I can be a little bit more intentional and really think about the water as I'm drinking it. Think about how the cool water feels going down my throat as I swallow it. Also pushing against a wall. That's a great way to kind of physically get stress out and release it into that wall. Another thing that we use quite often with people conversationally when we see that they are activated or stressed out is we'll ask them to quickly name 5 colors that they see in the room. And that is enough distraction that they focus on identifying a color. And that kind of allows us a little time to get away from the distress, reset them, and then maybe use some of the other skills to help them return to their resiliency zone. So that was super quick that I went through 3 of the 6 skills. As I said, tracking is foundational. So I encourage you all, this is invitational. No one is forced to use these skills. But if you're interested, if you think they sound interesting to learn, I encourage you to definitely download the iChill app. This is a free app in the App Store, iChill app. Or if you're not someone who has a cell phone, or if you don't like apps on your phone, you can also go to ichillapp.com. It's a website. The app is available in English, Spanish, and Ukrainian. And it has a brief explanation of each skill. And it also has some exercises that accompany some of the skills. It has a little visual of the resiliency zone and ways for you to kind of keep track of progress as you try out different skills. So today we talked about tracking, resourcing, and help now. The other 3 skills are grounding, gesturing, and shift and stay. So I do hope that maybe sometime in the future I can come back and talk a little bit more about those other skills. But if you are intrigued by these skills, I recommend that you practice tracking. Track your sensations. Ask yourself, is this sensation pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? As I mentioned, we often notice unpleasant sensations the most. So really challenge yourself to track pleasant sensations or to track when you're doing activities that you love. If you found any of these skills helpful, think about how you might weave them into your daily routine. And lastly, this exercise that again is invitational, if you like. I feel like we focus a lot sometimes on our flaws or our shortcomings. So I encourage people to write a statement of encouragement to yourself, like a love letter to you, really focusing on everything that is right and unique about you, all the good in you. And after you've written it, read it out loud to yourself. And as you read that statement of encouragement, pay attention to the sensations in your body, those pleasant sensations, and how it feels to hear those good things about yourself. And then lastly, if you like these skills, think about if you have someone in your life that you might also practice these skills with. Skills are designed to be shared. As I said, I'm a certified CRM teacher. Only people that go through the training with Trauma Resource Institute can do formal presentations such as these with, PowerPoint slides. But anyone who attends one of these presentations, including all of you, can be a community resiliency model guide. And this is a person who shares the skills conversationally with their loved ones and with their communities. So if that's something you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to. We ask that you first practice the skills in your own life, kind of practice what you preach, have some experience using the skills yourself before you start sharing them, and start being aware of where you are in your resilience zone if you get bumped out, and then where other people might be in their zone. If you do share the skills, remember that CRM is a choice and it is always invitational. So as a guide, you don't ever want to judge people. You want to follow their lead, ask open-ended questions, and don't direct them, but kind of observe and stay one step behind. But having said that, we definitely invite you to share these skills with others. And as I said, it can become a common language. You can actually hold each other accountable. I use these skills with my friends, with my family members. And my daughter will often say to me when she can tell that I'm bumped out of my zone, she will say, I think you need to take a moment, access a resource, have a glass of water, do something, because it can tell that you're activated right now. And that's actually very helpful to have someone see that I'm not just being a jerk, that I'm activated. I've been bumped out of my zone, and that's why I'm acting this way. So it can be very helpful to create safe, healing, and resilient spaces and communities. I also just want to share briefly that this model is backed up by a variety of research, some of which has been published and some of which is ongoing. But the model has been used in urban high crime communities, and people who have complex trauma have used these skills and have reported that they have been beneficial. It's also been examined in healthcare professionals using the skills with nurses and other people in high stress jobs. And additionally, it's been used in people who are in recovery from substance use. So just want to let you know that the model has been tested and it is backed up by science. One of the things I really love about this model is it seems so simple and so accessible, but it is actually backed up by a wealth of data and scientific knowledge. So with that, I did put this in the chat and I'll put it in again, but I thank you for being here. This can be a tough topic, and I'm so grateful that you all chose to be here today and listen to me speak. Feel free to reach out to me. My phone number and email is there if you have questions. I give these presentations for free, and I will come anywhere, faith community, book club, senior center. I'll come anywhere and talk about this stuff. And I'm also sharing here a QR code and a link for a very brief anonymous survey that we ask you to take. You could do it in about 2 minutes time. But it's just because my position is funded by a grant. And so we need to know, what people take away from these presentations, if they found it helpful or not. So you can, I'll email these slides out after the fact and people can click on the link, or they can also point their phone camera at the QR code. So with that, I'm going to stop share and open it up for any questions or comments. I'm also going to look in the chat here.
Thank you again to Maureen for sharing these important tools. Don't forget to see the video description below for slides and the survey. I'm also happy to share that Maureen will join us for part 2 of this discussion on July 25th. We hope that you will join us again next month on March 28th when Dr. Elliot Montgomery Sklar discusses whether or not caregiving is different for LGBT plus caregivers. Sign up for email reminders of future events at www.thrivingwithpride.org. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to fill out our survey so we can continue to provide and improve our programming.